Welcome to Chapter 1, The Discipline of Pattern Recognition. Pattern recognition. It's the amazing ability of the human brain to identify and detect regularities, those patterns, in the world all around us. It's a truly fundamental aspect of human cognition, allowing us to, quite literally, make sense of the vast amount of information that constantly bombards us every single day. Human pattern recognition is far from simple. It's a complex, dynamic process that involves so many different cognitive functions. Think about perception, attention, memory, and reasoning, all working together. It's what allows us to instantly recognize familiar objects and scenes, to make predictions and inferences about the world, and crucially, to learn from our experiences. Now, let's shift gears to the business world. In business, pattern recognition is your ability to observe the KUVA domains in which your organization operates and to identify what's truly important. Strategic thinkers, the real power players in business, possess powerful mental models of cause and effect relationships in their domains of expertise. This could be customer behavior, financial trends, or ever-shifting market conditions. By actively developing your pattern recognition abilities, you will become much better at perceiving emerging business challenges and, just as importantly, opportunities. As a result, you will move more rapidly to prioritize and mobilize your organization. Why? To avoid value destruction by neutralizing threats as they appear, or to create significant value by capitalizing on opportunities, or, as is often the case, some smart combination of those two outcomes. Strategic thinking, in essence, is the process through which you recognize, prioritize, and mobilize, we call it RPM for short, to effectively deal with both challenges and opportunities. This is a cyclical process, a continuous loop. Recognition of problems leads directly to prioritizing the most important ones and then mobilizing your organization to solve those very problems. Moving rapidly through these RPM cycles has immense value because it will help you, and crucially your team, move faster than your competitors. In today's fast-paced business environment, speed is often the name of the game. As we discussed in the introduction, remember Gene Woods? He's a prime example of someone with outstanding RPM capabilities. When he was named CEO of Carolina's Healthcare System, or CHS, in 2016, he foresaw a dramatic increase in merger and acquisition activity in U.S. healthcare. What was driving this? Declining profits across the industry, uncertainty surrounding regulatory policy, and the emergence of new market entrants, often funded with significant private capital. Seeing these emerging patterns, Woods quickly concluded that the industry was ripe for consolidation. He soon realized that many of his fellow CEOs also recognized the potential for consolidation, but they simply had no takeover targets or concrete plans in place. Many were heads down, deeply involved in dealing with significant market dynamics, Woods explains. This became a heads-up conversation, and that created new possibilities. Woods rapidly identified opportunities and then charted a promising path forward for his organization. In 2018, CHS merged with the Georgia-based healthcare system Navicent Health, and the combined entity was renamed Atrium Health. The enlarged company subsequently completed several acquisitions, and in 2022 combined with another large organization, as we mentioned in the introduction, to form the fifth largest nonprofit healthcare system in the United States, a testament to the power of recognizing patterns and acting decisively. So the question becomes, why is pattern recognition so incredibly valuable? Simply put, if you can't recognize threats and opportunities as they emerge, you cannot effectively prioritize and mobilize your organization to deal with them. Like most executives today, you are likely steering your business through a period of rapid change in competition, technology, and society itself. At the same time, you are under ever-increasing pressure to improve performance and transform your organization to remain competitive. In such challenging times, you face increasing mental processing challenges. You must be able to assess rapidly evolving situations, predict their trajectories, and adapt your strategies accordingly. And that is precisely where pattern recognition comes in so incredibly handy. Insight truly is power. If you can better recognize patterns in complex, fast-changing environments, you can act more rapidly and effectively than your competitors. That's a significant competitive advantage in any industry. Let's take a moment for reflection. To what extent is pattern recognition important in your day-to-day work? What types of patterns are most consequential for you and your organization? And how effective do you believe you are in recognizing them currently? Take a moment to consider these questions. Now let's think about games of strategy. Classic games like chess and Go are prime examples of domains where pattern recognition is absolutely essential to success. What makes chess grandmasters so much better than average players? One key is their superior ability to perceive important patterns on the chessboard and to understand the implications for their future moves. Arthur van Oude-Wetering, in his book Improve Your Chess Pattern Recognition, notes, "Pattern recognition is one of the most important mechanisms of chess improvement. Realizing that the position on the board is similar to ones you have seen before helps you quickly grasp the essence of that position and find the most promising continuation. It's about recognizing familiar configurations and knowing what to do next." The evolution of computer programs developed to play strategy games further highlights the sheer power of pattern recognition. Back in 1997, IBM's Deep Blue became the first computer system to win a chess match against reigning world champion Garry Kasparov. Deep Blue's strength didn't come from mimicking human thought, but from applying brute force computing power. It used a high-speed machine to search for all potential combinations of moves and counter-moves. This engine could evaluate an astonishing 200 million positions per second, and typically search to a depth of between 6 and 8 moves out, sometimes even to a maximum of 20 moves or more in certain situations. Today's best chess engines are even more sophisticated. They use a combination of brute force calculation and deep learning algorithms running on neural networks. These types of systems are increasingly better than even the best human players in even more challenging strategy games. In 2017, AlphaGo, a deep learning system designed by Google's DeepMind unit, decisively defeated KGA, the world's top-ranked Go professional, a landmark achievement in artificial intelligence. The good news, at least for now, is that these emerging AI systems are designed to augment and amplify business leaders' pattern recognition abilities and the other disciplines of strategic thinking, not to replace them entirely. That's because the domains in which you operate are not just complex and uncertain, they are also volatile and ambiguous. Remember the CUVA framework. To be an effective part of a symbiotic human-AI system, you will still need the uniquely human ability to discern important patterns amidst a sea of noise and leverage those insights to frame the most important problems, ask the right questions, prioritize action, and mobilize your organization effectively. Your creativity and vision, too, will remain incredibly important, especially in an era where competition intensifies, technological progress accelerates, and political and environmental crises become, unfortunately, business as usual. So how exactly does pattern recognition work in our brains? Executives who are good at pattern recognition are essentially matching their observations about what is happening in the world to their existing memory patterns. This matching process helps them to rapidly identify what is important to focus on. Strategic thinkers leverage their mental models, those internal maps of how the world works, to make sense of what is going on and, crucially, to translate insight directly into action. At its very best, pattern recognition involves going far beyond simply perceiving the events around us. It's about understanding their broader significance and anticipating how the already dynamic business landscape will likely evolve in the future. Jack Welch, the late former CEO of General Electric, or GE, and one of America's most influential business leaders, famously noted, "Seeing around corners is what differentiates the good leader." Not many people have that. Not many people can predict that corner. That ability to anticipate and foresee is invaluable. Strong strategic thinkers are able to process vast quantities of information to make rapid, effective judgments about what's essential in the complex business landscape. The mental models they have developed over time, stored in long-term memory, also allow them to perceive weak but important signals in a sea of noise. As a result, they can make informed decisions even when faced with incomplete information and in the face of great uncertainty. To become a truly great strategic thinker, you must therefore strive to develop powerful mental models of what is happening in the most critical domains of your business. Doing so will help you process more information without stretching your cognitive processing capacity so thinly that you lose focus or become confused. Research consistently shows that information overload saps our energy and self-control, impairs our decision-making ability, and even makes us less collaborative, a dangerous combination in today's business world. To develop your pattern recognition abilities, it helps to understand that your brain has two basic systems of thinking, as described by Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman in his book Thinking Fast and Slow. He explains it using System 1 and System 2. The capabilities of System 1 include innate skills, things we are born with and even share with other animals. We are born prepared to perceive the world around us, recognize objects, orient our attention, avoid losses, and even fear things like spiders. Other mental activities become fast and automatic through prolonged practice. Think about riding a bike or typing. System 1 operates largely in the background, quickly and naturally, with very little conscious thought required. It's efficient, but it's also prone to bias and error because it relies on shortcuts and heuristics. System 2, on the other hand, is more deliberate, slower, and much more analytical. As Kahneman describes it, System 2 allocates attention to the effortful mental activities that demand it, including complex computations. The operations of System 2 are often associated with the subjective experience of agency, choice, and concentration. This second system gets called to action when you are focusing on challenging cognitive tasks, such as complex mathematics or in-depth strategic planning. It takes control of your attention when it spots patterns, especially when you are surprised by new stimuli. To illustrate how these systems work together, imagine you are a financial services CEO who has proactively set aside provisions for loan losses to hedge against what you believe will be an impending recession. However, your quarterly results come in and they beat consensus earnings estimates, a pleasant surprise. As you digest this data, your System 2 taps into your long-term memory, actively seeking similar patterns you have previously experienced. It might recall times of government stimulus or a rise in employment, factors that could lower defaults among borrowers, for example. You then begin constructing a narrative, a story, to help you remember, understand, and communicate what you are seeing in the data. Leveraging these insights, you then shift to envisioning the future through what is known as associative activation. The processing of one thought, say government stimulus, sparks the immediate activation of related ideas stored in your long-term memory. Think of concepts like quantitative easing, liquidity in the markets, and perhaps even inflation. This process leads to priming, a fascinating phenomenon whereby exposure to one stimulus makes you react faster to related stimuli by speeding up your cognitive processing and memory retrieval. Priming is like ripples in water. Many associations can be formed that in turn prime other ideas, creating a web of interconnected thoughts. How does this sort of mental priming actually work in business leadership? Imagine you are leading a company that is performing poorly, with falling sales and profits and a decreasing share price, a worrying trend. When you see these poor results, memories of activist investors, those individuals or firms who believe they can fix underperforming firms, may suddenly spring to mind. Because your brain is primed to think of this information, you can think fast and react rapidly when you see a potential challenge develop. For instance, if you notice a hedge fund buying a larger stake in the company and pushing for a seat on the board, a clear signal of potential activist pressure. In essence, you can better sense and respond to emerging threats and opportunities, which, as we've discussed, is the bedrock of strategic thinking. These pattern recognition processes are absolutely essential to effective decision-making and robust strategy development. Pattern recognition allows you to identify trends, relationships, and other meaningful information from a large amount of data that might otherwise seem like just noise. You can then leverage these insights to make more informed decisions, develop more effective strategies, and even anticipate future events with greater accuracy. Additionally, recognizing patterns in data can also help you to identify potential risks and opportunities, which is of course critical for effective strategy development in any organization. It's likely that you don't even realize this is happening much of the time because your brain is primarily controlled by System 1, which moves so rapidly and automatically. So to become a more effective strategic thinker, you must consciously focus on developing your brain's System 2 capabilities as part of your wider exercise program for strengthening your strategic thinking ability. It's about intentionally engaging that slower, more analytical part of your mind. Let's pause again for reflection. How can you become more aware of when you are, and perhaps more importantly, when you are not, engaged in Kahneman's System 2 thinking? Consider your own thought processes and how you might become more intentional about engaging System 2. Now, as you develop your pattern recognition abilities, it's equally essential to understand the limitations and actively avoid falling into some common traps that can derail even the best thinkers. Failing to recognize fundamental cognitive limitations is one such significant pitfall. You cannot realistically hope to sense and respond to every single significant development impacting on your business. We all have a limited capacity for attention, and focusing too intensely on one specific task can paradoxically render you blind, in essence, to other things that would typically draw your gaze. A classic and very impactful illustration of this is the invisible gorilla, an experiment run by Christopher Chabris and Daniel Simons. They asked students on a psychology course at Harvard University to watch a video and carefully count how many times the players passed a basketball. In the video, more than half the participants were completely oblivious to a person walking right through the game in a gorilla suit, even pounding their chest. Even after the students were told about the gorilla with the benefit of hindsight, they often could not recall seeing it at all. Their minds were so intensely focused on the activity they were told was critical, counting basketball passes, that it left little spare capacity to spot even a very novel and visually distinct stimulus like a gorilla. It's a legacy of evolutionary biology that we prioritize the gravest threats and most promising opportunities to boost our chances of survival. In business, this focused attention enables leaders to concentrate on critical tasks without becoming overwhelmed by an abundance of stimuli. But this intense focus also comes packaged with potential downsides, especially as the world becomes more complicated and confusing, demanding our attention in multiple directions at once. The implication, paradoxically, is to be wary about the very real pitfalls of selective attention. If you can consciously take some time to assess and reflect, you'll be much better able to detect the patterns that truly matter and not get distracted by what are essentially shiny objects, things that grab our attention but are ultimately not important. Like most executives, you probably face increasing demands on your time and ever more complex challenges as technological, social, and ecological developments rapidly accelerate. But that very reality just underlines the increasing importance of enhancing your ability to effectively detect patterns amidst the noise. Beyond simply recognizing the dangers of limited and selective attention, it is also crucial to understand that we are all vulnerable to biases, and these biases can significantly impede our ability to perceive the most critical threats and opportunities. In his influential book, The Black Swan, Nassim Nicholas Taleb writes that leaders continually fail to see significant yet unlikely threats. Think of the 2008 global financial crisis, or conversely, significant yet unlikely opportunities, like the emergence of cryptocurrencies and blockchain as a transformational technology. You won't become great at pattern recognition if you're unaware of your own biases in collecting and interpreting information. Kahneman famously calls the human mind a machine for jumping to conclusions. The absence of good information often leads us to make assumptions to fill in the gaps. If those assumptions are reasonably good ones, and the costs are not too high if they turn out to be wrong, then this mental shortcut can be helpful. It helps us navigate complex events without always having the complete picture. It is essential, though, that you actively strive to avoid classic cognitive traps, such as confirmation bias, the very common tendency to actively seek out new data that are consistent with your pre-existing viewpoints, or to preferentially recall evidence that confirms your existing theories while ignoring or downplaying contradictory evidence. A related bias, often called the narrative trap, is the tendency to perceive patterns that simply aren't actually there. We naturally try to make sense of complex, seemingly disparate events by constructing stories and ascribing cause and effect, even when the connections are tenuous or non-existent. To illustrate this, consider the financial news media. Bank stocks are often said to boom on the back of an interest rate rise. But this simplistic analysis often fails to account for mere coincidence, or perhaps more importantly, may not control for other important contributing variables that are the real drivers of stock prices. Another version of confirmation bias is the halo effect, as described in Phil Rosenzweig's book with the same title, The Halo Effect. This is the tendency for one prominent or important aspect of a person or a company to powerfully shape perceptions of the whole in ways not necessarily supported by the actual facts. In his research on the halo effect, Rosenzweig showed that it powerfully distorts our thinking about company performance. He explains that it's common to assume a company with robust financial performance must also have a sound strategy and strong leadership. Conversely, when performance wanes, we're often quick to conclude that its strategy is unsound and that its CEO has suddenly become arrogant or out of touch. Tangible overall results create a general impression, a halo, that then informs our perception of the more granular elements that actually contribute to firm performance. Or, as Rosenzweig very succinctly put it, we often confound outputs with inputs, assuming correlation implies causation. Wishful thinking, known more formally as the sunk cost fallacy, is another important cognitive bias to be aware of. It leads us to irrationally invest precious resources into a losing proposition in the vain hope of recouping previous losses, rather than cutting our losses and moving on. This tendency to double down has been at the heart of many financial scandals, such as when rogue financial traders trap themselves in a downward spiral of increasingly large and risky bets, which in some cases have contributed to institutional failure and even global financial crises. Finally, it's essential to avoid blaming others when things go wrong. It is a natural human tendency to blame outside factors or external circumstances for negative results while simultaneously taking personal credit for positive outcomes. A classic case of self-serving bias. Psychologists call this self-serving bias. And while it may contribute to perceptions of personal success and political power, it can dangerously cloud judgment, leading to potentially catastrophic errors in decision-making. Strategic thinkers actively avoid the natural urge to scapegoat. Instead, they seek to unearth and reform the underlying structures and processes that drive poor performance. They are curious and open to a wide range of potential solutions to their challenges, rather than immediately pointing fingers. The key implication is that you simply cannot accurately assess your organization's rapidly shifting realities if you have crippling biases in collecting and interpreting information. Garbage in, garbage out, as the old aphorism so aptly puts it. You will not be able to accurately identify potential threats and opportunities, and then use these flawed insights to envision and enact the right course of action for your company. Clearly, you must learn to recognize and actively avoid common cognitive biases, but simply debiasing yourself is not enough. Beyond that, you must also develop critical thinking skills that specifically focus on and rigorously test your pattern recognition abilities. In a novel situation with high stakes, you must be intentional in critiquing your initial perceptions of the situation. Cognitive biases can obscure important realities, causing us to see what we want to see, rather than what is actually there. The best strategic thinkers are consistently skeptical about their own intuitions and actively challenge everyone's convictions, including their own. Leaders like Gene Woods tend to choose paths that advance their predefined plans and goals. However, pattern recognition can also clearly indicate that you need to adjust course, perhaps significantly, to effectively respond to what is happening around you in the dynamic business environment. Continuous adaptation is a hallmark of great strategic thinkers. As in Woods' case, it often starts with an open and honest discussion. the right environment for strategic thinking to truly flourish. Best practice here includes discussing the potential implications of emerging patterns with diverse teams, who will offer a variety of viewpoints and experiences that can significantly improve problem solving and decision making. The discussion can, for example, highlight potential problems with your existing mental model, such as when new observations directly contradict your original assessment of the business landscape, rendering a previously sound strategic plan suddenly unreliable or even obsolete. You can then actively collect more information and revise your assumptions to make better judgments moving forward. Through this ongoing process of critiquing and correcting, strategic thinkers can rigorously test and improve the fruits of their pattern recognition, leading to more robust and effective strategies. Let's reflect again. What can you do to actively avoid falling into these common cognitive traps, cultivate your natural curiosity, and ensure that you are continuously updating your mental models to reflect the ever-changing reality of the business world? Now, while it is absolutely essential to watch out for the ways in which pattern recognition can sometimes let you down, don't let that detract from its enormous inherent power. The capacity to recognize patterns is deeply built into our brains, and like the other disciplines of strategic thinking, it can also be actively developed and strengthened over time. Research on neuroplasticity has clearly shown that the brain directs attention and rallies effort to activities that strain our cognitive abilities. As you learn and practice, you become better at your craft, and your mind no longer has to work quite as hard. The regions of the brain that govern attention and effortful control actually show much reduced activity as skills become more ingrained. Total immersion is widely recognized as the best way to learn a new language. It's also a remarkably effective way to gain deep insight into complex business environments. Immersion is absolutely essential because people need significant soak time in a specific milieu to build powerful and accurate mental models of that environment. And this insight also directly highlights the dangers of moving people too rapidly from business to business or job to job within an organization. There simply isn't enough time to truly master the core dynamics of each new situation before they are moved again. You cannot realistically hope to develop superior pattern recognition in every single business domain. You must instead immerse yourself deeply in selected areas. For example, specific business functions such as marketing, industries like fast-moving consumer goods, or stakeholder environments such as government relations. The key implication here is that you need to put a lot of thought and intentionality into selecting the domains in which you aspire to become a truly strategic thinker. Only then can you get the necessary immersion and focused training to become truly great at pattern recognition in those chosen areas. Another very effective way to develop your pattern recognition ability is to work closely with recognized experts in apprenticeship-like relationships. Actively seek out opportunities where you can directly observe and learn from the work of people who are already great at pattern recognition, and so absorb their ways of thinking. This requires more than just passive observation. You want to actively learn as much as possible about the internal thought processes of the expert. Of course, this means they must be willing to devote some of their valuable time to discussing their thought processes with you in detail. Helpful questions to ask include: what were the most important patterns or signals you perceived in this situation? What connections did you make to previous situations or events you have experienced? What, if anything, was novel or truly unusual about the situation or problem? How confident are you in your conclusions at this stage? To what extent will you continue to refine your thinking and adjust your approach as new information emerges? Additionally, it helps to intentionally cultivate your innate curiosity and cast a wide net for information sources. Psychologists have found that simply being curious actively spurs the urge to explore, discover, and grow, which is incredibly useful when you need to get into the finer details of the microenvironment, details which you might otherwise easily overlook. Focus, too, on actively looking for trends. For example, you could systematically look at news reports and industry research, or intentionally obtain information through networking, and then focus on developing specific hypotheses about those trends. Leaders like Gene Woods have decades of accumulated experience that enable them to see critical patterns, but they also work very hard to supplement this existing knowledge and continuously strengthen their mental models. As Woods himself says, you need to be able to absorb a broad spectrum of data points, qualitative dynamics experiences, and then connect the dots to form a well-reasoned hypothesis about the best bets to make on the future. Making a similar point in an interview with the American business magazine Inc., Fred W. Smith, the founder, former CEO, and now executive chairman of FedEx, summarized his approach to taking in information about what is going on in the world, describing it as the ability to assimilate information from many different disciplines all at once, particularly information about change, because from change inevitably comes opportunity. So you might be reading something about the cultural history of the United States and come to some realization about where the country is headed demographically. Smith went on to say that he reads close to 4 hours a day, consuming everything from newspapers to books on management theory and even flight theory. I try to keep up with the latest technological developments through specialized journals, and I'm genuinely fascinated with the future. A testament to the power of continuous learning and information absorption. Case study analysis is another powerful approach that will directly help you improve your pattern recognition. You can effectively absorb valuable lessons and build powerful mental models by systematically consuming a diverse range of realistic cases, in-depth studies of a group, event, organization, or even an entire industry, and actively reflecting on the experiences depicted. Research strongly suggests that exposure to realistic depictions of reality is particularly impactful in developing pattern recognition skills. Simulation is yet another powerful way to enhance your pattern recognition abilities. By intentionally exposing yourself to situations that are very similar to those you encounter in the real world, for example, through active participation in realistic business simulations, you can significantly improve your situational awareness, pattern recognition, and even strategic planning and execution skills. Simulations are an excellent and relatively low-risk way to train those all-important mental processes that enable us to think critically and strategically and make better choices in complex and uncertain environments. Good feedback is also an incredibly powerful tool for developing your pattern recognition abilities. Research clearly shows that when people are given detailed performance feedback after completing a task, they rapidly converge on the optimal trade-off between speed and accuracy in decision-making. That's because feedback provides valuable reference points and reinforces associations between specific cues and effective strategies, directly helping you to develop the mental models that enable rapid decision-making in uncertain environments, especially those characterized by incomplete information. Through consistent feedback, executives can also rigorously test their convictions and overcome the cognitive limitations and biases that often lead to poor decisions and negative outcomes. So, in summary, pattern recognition is an incredibly important aspect of strategic thinking because it enables you to identify meaningful patterns and trends in vast amounts of data and information. This, in turn, allows you to gain a deeper understanding of your operations, your markets, and your customers, and to identify both potential challenges and emerging opportunities much earlier than you otherwise would. If you can't effectively recognize essential patterns in the most important domains in which your business operates, you have little hope of focusing on what truly matters and developing robust and effective strategies to navigate the complexities of the modern business world. So, actively work on strengthening your pattern recognition capabilities through consistent immersion, careful observation, and thoughtful distillation of the key insights you gain. The next chapter will explore how the discipline of systems analysis can further enhance your pattern recognition abilities, taking your strategic thinking to the next level. To help you get started in developing this essential skill, here's a pattern recognition checklist. 1. What are the most important domains in which you need to actively develop your pattern recognition abilities for maximum impact in your role? 2, how can you best immerse yourself in those domains to enhance your mental models and gain deeper insights? 3, what specific practices can you use to further develop your pattern recognition abilities, such as actively learning from simulations, working closely with recognized experts, or consistently seeking out and acting upon high-quality feedback? 4, what can you do to intentionally cultivate your curiosity and get more in tune with emerging trends in your industry and the broader business environment? 5, how should you develop your awareness of your potential vulnerabilities to common cognitive biases that can impair pattern recognition? 6, what specific processes can you implement to help debias yourself and strengthen your critical thinking ability, leading to more accurate and effective pattern recognition? Welcome to Chapter 2, the discipline of systems analysis. Systems analysis. What is it, and why is it so important for strategic thinking? Essentially, systems analysis is about building robust mental models of complex domains, such as the competitive environment in which your business operates. The process of creating these systems models consists of 3 key steps. First, breaking complex phenomena down into sets of component elements. Second, understanding precisely how those elements interact with each other. And third, using that in-depth information to build good representations of the most important cause and effect relationships that drive the business world. Internally, within your organization, systems analysis enables you to identify the critical interconnections and dependencies between different parts. Think about functions, processes, and systems. How do they all relate? By understanding how these different parts of the organization interact and influence each other, you can identify opportunities for significant improvement and develop targeted strategies to optimize overall performance. Externally, you can leverage systems analysis to understand the broader environment in which your organization operates. By thoroughly analyzing how your organization interacts with external forces, such as customers, suppliers, competitors, and governments, you can identify opportunities for growth and develop effective strategies to capitalize on them proactively. So let's define it more formally. What exactly is systems analysis? Systems analysis is fundamentally a holistic approach. It focuses squarely on the connections and interactions between the elements of a system, rather than on the individual components in isolation. It's based on the core idea that the interactions between the parts are what ultimately determine the overall behavior of the system as a whole. As a result, even seemingly small changes in one part of the system can have cascading effects on other elements, sometimes in unexpected ways. It's a truly valuable tool for solving complex problems and for making strategic decisions that carefully consider the potential impacts and implications of different courses of action. Systems models can significantly enhance your pattern recognition ability, which we discussed in Chapter 1, by effectively reducing the cognitive load required to focus on what is most important. As a result, you more quickly see emerging challenges and opportunities in the complex business landscape. This, in turn, allows you to predict likely impacts more rapidly and develop strategies to change system dynamics in desired ways, to steer the system towards a more favorable outcome. Systems analysis is already an essential tool for scientists studying the world's climate, and for economists seeking to forecast the dynamics and evolution of the global economy. In these fields, the phenomena are far too complex to be dealt with as a whole. They are simply beyond human capacity to fully understand in their entirety. They must be broken down into more manageable subsystems that can be modeled independently. For climate scientists, for instance, this means creating separate but interconnected models of the atmosphere, the ocean, the cryosphere. That's areas covered by frozen water like ice caps and glaciers, and the biosphere, which is all living things. These submodels are developed separately and themselves consist of multiple elements, but can be used alone or coupled together to generate useful predictions for the global climate. In both climate and economic modeling, computer-based system models, powered by advanced analytical and pattern recognition algorithms, augment and amplify human ability in powerful symbiotic relationships, humans and machines working together to understand incredibly complex systems. Engineers have also long used systems models, often supported by sophisticated computer-based modeling to design complex products and systems. These models can capture processes that happen both in parallel and sequentially. They are used to maximize throughput and productivity, for example, by rigorously reducing the often significant costs of holding inventory unnecessarily. Product development professionals, meanwhile, frequently use architectural models in their design processes. High-tech products today are simply far too complex to design as a single monolithic unit. Take, for example, today's increasingly autonomous vehicles or self-driving cars. They incorporate a dizzying array of components, sensors of all types, actuators, powerful processors, and incredibly complex algorithms, in addition to more traditional elements such as engines, drivetrains, and chassis. Autonomous vehicles are designed as systems consisting of many interconnected elements that can be worked on independently and then integrated together, as long as the agreed interface specifications are carefully honored. This modular approach to design is essential for managing complexity. Let's pause again for a moment of reflection. Have you learned about systems analysis in the past, perhaps in your education or previous work experience? Have you actively applied it in your work? If so, was it helpful? Take a moment to consider your own experience with systems analysis. So why is systems analysis so incredibly valuable for business leaders? To be a more effective strategic thinker, you can learn to create systems models that significantly enhance your ability to recognize patterns, make more accurate predictions, formulate more robust strategies, make better informed decisions, and ultimately take action faster. All crucial elements in today's dynamic business environment. These models may be formal models that run on powerful computers, but often they are mental models, frameworks that you run inside your own head. The key is to think in terms of systems. You can model many relevant business domains as systems: production processes, entire organizations, industries, and even national and global economies. For business leaders, it's absolutely essential to leverage systems analysis to deeply understand both the internal dynamics of your own organization and the economic, political, and social forces that shape its external environment. Our minds naturally try to break complicated problems down into constituent elements to make complex tasks easier to handle. While it's certainly important to understand those elements in isolation, knowing precisely how they fit together and interact is also absolutely essential. If you fail to do so, you're likely to be predictably surprised by what actually occurs in complex situations. As a compelling example, consider what happened in March 2021, when the Ever Given, a skyscraper-sized container ship, got wedged across the Suez Canal for 6 long days. An unfortunate navigation error rapidly fractured already strained global supply chains and significantly disrupted international trade. The blockage stopped international trade valued at over $9 billion daily, equivalent to $400 million worth of trade per hour, or an astonishing $6.7 million per minute. Even after the Suez Canal was finally cleared, it took weeks for global trade flows to stabilize and recover fully from the shock. Why did this relatively minor incident have such a massive global impact? Because global trade is a very complex and surprisingly fragile system. The relentless drive for economic efficiency, particularly the desire to minimize the cost of holding inventory, results in materials and components being transported from many locations all over the world, often over vast distances, to arrive just in time for the next stage of production. While things are stable and predictable, this system operates remarkably smoothly and efficiently. It's also, however, inherently brittle, highly vulnerable to even small failures. Because there is so little slack and redundancy built into the system, those small failures can rapidly cascade to generate more and bigger problems, creating a domino effect. As Lucas Kinnegadner, the CEO and co-founder of mobile data company Anyline, puts it, "Our supply chains are the arteries of industry, and in the era of same-day delivery and just-in-time inventory, even a small blockage can cause disruptions down the line." Analysts of the global logistics system had long predicted that even minor disruptions would have significant consequences. While they couldn't specify the exact initiating event, they knew that international trade was inherently vulnerable to cascading systems failures. in which one small problem generates a breakdown somewhere else, triggering more problems and potentially leading to a much larger collapse. However, despite these warnings, few companies had proactively built slack and redundancy into their supply chains. Most would simply not be able to avoid the widespread impact when a disruption occurred. While the specific nature, location, and precise timing of the blockage of the Suez Canal were not predictable in advance, the potential for something to disrupt a vital transportation link in the global trade system was well recognized. This example powerfully highlights how systems analysis supports the creation of effective contingency plans. While you cannot predict precisely what specific crisis will strike, you can anticipate broad classes of potential financial, ecological, social, and political disasters that could significantly impact your business. These insights provide a robust basis for designing crisis response plans for your business that are ready to deal with a range of potential problems, even if you don't know the exact nature of the crisis in advance. Consider, for example, how the systemic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic rapidly spiraled into a full-blown global economic crisis, with widespread production meltdowns and a collapse in both consumption and confidence. Savvy investors leveraged their deep understanding of how markets behave under stress to anticipate how COVID-19 would cascade through the global economic system. They rapidly recognized that a minority of companies would actually prosper during the pandemic, even as many others struggled. For example, some pharmaceutical companies were significantly boosted by the rapid development and rollout of COVID-19 vaccines. Technology giants reaped the rewards from the sudden shift to the remote working revolution, and online retailers benefited enormously from widespread lockdowns and restrictions on physical retail. Leveraging these systems-level insights, keen investors quickly moved money out of vulnerable sectors like travel and tourism and into potential winners in the new economic landscape. Bill Ackman, for example, who runs the hedge fund Pershing Square Capital Management, made a very astute bet that insurance premiums would rise sharply in 2020 as COVID-19 caused economies to lock down. On the strength of a relatively modest $27 million investment, he made an astonishing $2.6 billion profit by correctly anticipating the systemic impacts of the pandemic. Systems analysis is a powerful tool for effectively managing complexity, focusing attention on what truly matters, and taking decisive action in dynamic environments. The world is neither stable nor entirely predictable. It is ever more dynamic and complex. This inherent dynamism creates both risk and uncertainty, often leading to information overload for decision makers. Systems analysis helps you to quickly cut through the noise to identify what is and isn't truly essential for your organization's success. Done well, it enables you to see further around corners, just as Jack Welch described, and it equips you with the critical insights you'll need to turn potentially damaging disruption into a significant advantage for your organization. Let's pause again for reflection. What specific challenges does your organization currently face for which systems analysis would be a particularly helpful and valuable tool? Consider a current problem and how a systems approach might offer new perspectives. So how exactly does systems analysis work in practice? System models generally have three fundamental components: elements, interconnections, sometimes called interfaces, and a purpose or function. To illustrate this, let's think about how your own organization could be modeled as a system. For your business to succeed in the long run, you must effectively integrate diverse functions and talents into a cohesive whole that is demonstrably greater than the sum of its individual parts. As Catherine Bach-Kalin, a former HR executive who now sits on multiple corporate boards, says, "It's essential to make connections among the people, functions, and processes, looking at the enterprise and the opportunities more broadly. You must understand how to manage a business holistically and what you need regarding resources across every function." Efforts to apply systems analysis to organizational design began in the 1970s. Jay Galbraith, then a professor at Wharton School, first published his influential STAR model of organizational systems in 1978. Then in 1980, the consultancy McKinsey famously introduced the 7S framework: These models are quite similar in their core concepts. Galbraith divided organizations into 5 interconnected elements, neatly arrayed in the shape of a star: strategy, structure, processes, rewards, and people. McKinsey modeled organizational systems as consisting of 7 elements: strategy, structure, systems, in this context meaning organizational systems like IT and control systems; staff, which is people; style, meaning culture, skills, and shared values, representing purpose. Of the 2 models, Galbraith's STAR model has arguably better withstood the test of time and is still widely used by many business leaders today, perhaps because the STAR makes for a more visually appealing diagram, and 5 elements are simply easier to remember and apply than 7. Building upon these earlier frameworks, I've developed a 6-element model for thinking about organizations as systems. These 6 key elements are strategic direction, structure and decision-making, processes and systems, people and capabilities,